to the textual narrative, there's clearly a really strong and prominent musical narrative to the work as well. And I'd love just, as someone who works for the University Musical Society, I'd love to just hear you talk about the role of music in your life growing up and how this sort of use of music in the foreground of this work came into being and why.
In terms of growing up, I suppose music was fairly prominent in my home when I grew up. The first concert I ever went to was to see Leonard Cohen at the Albert Hall in London when I was 12 with my mum.
Wow.
It's a very cool thing
Very cool.
for your parents to take you to, and I have very vivid memories of it now. And only recently someone said to me, "Oh, that must have been a really formative experience for you." And I said, "No, I don't think so, really. You know, I enjoyed it, but I don't think it was particularly important." And they were like, "Come on, the first thing you went to see was Leonard Cohen, and now you're a writer who writes these, you know, very emotional, very poetic plays about death." It's like, oh yeah, yeah, and it had really never occurred to me before then. So music is quite important, I think, in that sense. But in terms of the music that's used in this piece, the starting point was A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I went and looked for the various musical versions of Midsummer Night's Dream. And for me, Benjamin Britten's opera of A Midsummer Night's Dream is a great piece of work, and is his strongest for me. And then so then we sort of moved away, from that into the music that inspired Britten. He was very influenced by Purcell. Music that Britten conducted. So the Purcell that we use in the piece is Purcell that Britten conducted. And then from that also, a lot of the theme of the piece is talking about the power of the human voice, and particularly this slightly superhuman power that opera singers have, and particularly sopranos. Because basically they scream for a living, and technically that's absolutely right. If you put a camera down the throat of a screaming person and a camera down the throat of a soprano, there is no difference. They're screaming to a tune, and that's why it has such a strong emotional impact on us. Is the fact that we're kind of genetically programmed to react to that, both in the sense that we're genetically programmed to find crying babies distressing, so that we can help them, and our race keeps it. We're genetically programmed to react to other human beings screaming, and actually that's linked to the fact that we're sort of genetically programmed to have an empathetic response to muscular contraction, and so if you see someone else give a very strong stomach contraction, like if they're vomiting, then it makes our body do it as well, on a small level. And a lot of great choreography, a choreographer like Peter Bausch, for example, uses that very strongly, but actually part of the emotional experience of watching someone like Peter Bausch is that you see these dancers constantly
doing that.
And instinctively, on some small level, your own stomach muscles are doing it at the same time. In the same way that when we see someone yawn, it makes us yawn as well. In fact, often when I describe this to people, just even talking about that empathetic response of a yawn makes people yawn. And it's the same thing with those opera singers, that when we hear someone screaming in that way, we tip our own vocal apparatus into that same position without realizing that we're doing it, and that tricks the brain into going, "Oh, I'm on edge." And so I think that's a very powerful thing.
It is.
And so then moving forward from that musically, in terms of those musical choices, was looking at those other great singers who do that. Piaf, being a great example of it. That the way that Piaf could belt is exactly that same impact. But then going another way is we use Nat King Cole, and Nat King Cole does another thing which is about pulling the larynx very far down in the throat into this sort of sobbing position, and again that instinctively we do that with our own vocal apparatus, and it tricks the brain into thinking that you need to cry. See, you're yawning now. It tricks the brain into thinking that you need to cry, and that's what happens with those singers who we say, "God, they weren't singing a sad song; they just made me weep, and I didn't know why." Technically that's what's happening, is that kind of thing. And so that was the starting kind of point for all of those. But also then I wanted to act contrapuntally to all of that classical music. Is this contemporary electronic music that's about manipulation of electricity, because another thing that sort of runs throughout the whole thing is about the recording of the voice, and and about how we listen to the voice, and we keep talking about dictaphones, recording the voice on dictaphones. And so I wanted to kind of subtly run under that, this sense of this electronic music that's about this sort of crackles and pops and buzzes of electricity. So we have artists like Ensemble and Aphex Twin and, you know, all of those kind of people who are, you know, marvelous artists in a different way. And so that was my logic.
I'm told I have one more question before we turn it over to the audience. So this is a tough one for me. But
Make it a funny one.
Well, I'll try. I have to make it a serious one.
Okay.
And you'll make it funny.
Okay.
And because we have so many young people here sort of starting out, I'd love to hear you just talk about some of the artistic experiences as a viewer that you had young in your life, early on in your life, that you feel as a creative artist now you really carry with you. And I guess the hackneyed way of putting it, what are your artistic influences? Yeah.
In terms of things that I saw when I was young, I've already talked about seeing A Midsummer Night's Dream when I was very young, even though I don't really remember it. And having talked about Pina Bausch, I was shown Pina Bausch. Pina Bausch is, you know, pretty avant-garde. And we were shown her at school when I was about 12. In music, yeah, I know, it's amazing, isn't it? In music class, we were shown her version of The Rite of Spring because we were studying Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and rather than just play it to us, it had been shown on television, and we were all amazed because the woman's top falls off, and we can see her boobies, you know. So it was amazing. Yeah. And then, you know, all these years later, I go to university, and we're told this is one of the most important theatre makers of the 20th century, and my tutors were amazed when I was like, "Oh, I've seen this. Yeah, I watched this at school when I was like 12. And again, a friend said that must have been a really formative experience for you, and which had never occurred to me. And another formative experience from my childhood that I didn't realise until much later was that when my parents used to go out every Tuesday evening to go and meet friends, and I would play their record collection. And my favourite thing was this record by this man and a woman, and I didn't know who they were. It was this white man and Japanese woman, and the Japanese woman, they did alternate tracks on this thing, and the Japanese woman just screamed, and I just thought it was, and the man did these quite boring songs with the guitars. His name was John Lennon. I had no idea who it was. It's just that, but you know, so I would click it, and I ruined the record by, you know, picking up the needle and moving it forward because the woman just did all this screaming stuff, which I thought was point. And again, I think it was a very formative thing that then, you know, years later, when I hear, say, an artist like Diamant de Galas, who I think is, you know, remarkable, I think I had what felt like an instinctive understanding of that kind of music from having listened to it, you know, from Yoko Ono, who I think is a remarkable artist. Much as she's very dated and, you know, there's a lot wrong with the work, I think she's very underrated. And in fact, I made a show last year that made lots of references to Yoko Ono's work called White Tea, and used lots of Yoko Ono's music. But in terms of other artists that I admire, I would say, in terms of writers, I don't really pay much attention to other theatre writers. But though Tim Crouch's play The Author, that was on recently, I think is a remarkable piece of work. I think Tim Crouch is great. But in terms of writers, I would be much more interested in, say, someone like Michelle Faber, or maybe early Jeanette Winterson. The Passion by Jeanette Winterson is probably my favourite book. Musically, in terms of singers, we would say someone like Diamant de Galas or Maria Callas or Janet Baker, or Bjork, I think, is a remarkable artist. In terms of visual arts, I would say Louise Bourgeois, maybe. What other art forms? Give me an art form and I'll give you an artist.
Dance. Well, you talked about
Pina Bausch.
Yeah. Fashion.
Fashion, I think probably... I think it would have to be Vivienne Westwood, actually. I think Vivienne Westwood is, you know, crazy. Yeah. But they're all fashion people are all crazy. But also Alexander McQueen and Gaultier, you know, all of those people who are sort of at the crazy end of things. And yeah, I'm very interested in fashion. I'm very interested in design in general. I spend a lot of time visiting design museums. I have a poster on my wall in my office of Ettore Sottsass's design for the Valentine Olivetti typewriter. So I'm a bit of a geek about all of those kind of things, product design and stuff like that. And in terms of architecture, maybe someone like Mies van der Rohe or Le Corbusier, or yeah, maybe Mies. There you go.
Thank you. I think we're going to open up the questioning now to the audience. And